Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
In our final part of Chapter 3, Hands Off, from Love's a Secret Weapon, Donna becomes a cover girl, gets some spins on KFWB, and has an experience that highlights the weight of responsibility on her shoulders for her family and a sense of lack. Go, Donna.
I was signed to a new label, Challenge, run by Joe Johnson and Dave Burgess, leader of the Champs, who made Tequila a #1 hit record. I went into the studio to make my recording of Edith Piaf's If You Love Me in English and On the Good Ship Lollipop, originally sung by America's sweetheart, Shirley Temple. These song ideas came from my mother. She wanted me to reinterpret both songs, and I did. A trombone very distinctively soloed, while the DJ, Wink Martindale, made a guest appearance on the Good Ship Lollipop. In his deepest baritone voice, he said, "You'll get a tummy ache." In addition, there was a new relationship brewing with the publisher. Chuck Laufer ran Peterson Publishing, which had a very popular magazine called Teen. In the most innocent way, he took a fancy to me and asked if I would pose for a cover. This would be the first of several. He also included me in personal appearances that Teen would sponsor and really gave me a high-profile exposure in Hollywood. Maybe my angels were watching over me, because in this sort of domino effect, once my career got rolling, I would meet people like Mr. Laufer who were generous and kind. They became instrumental in escalating this little girl from Mar Vista into the spotlight. It's ironic that the first cover that I did was a picture of me on the beach, peeking out from behind a surfboard toward a group of waving teenagers in a new '63 Ford convertible. The tall, smiley guy was my boyfriend, Bob Linkletter. Maybe it was almost prophetic of Mr. Laufer, because he had the vision to associate me with surfing. Before the year's end, I sang Muscle Bustle with Dick Dale, the king of surf guitar, in the film Muscle Beach Party. KFWB DJ Bill Balance, #1 disc jockey in LA at the time, picked me as his pick of the week for On the Good Ship Lollipop, 3 weeks in a row. I was getting a lot of airplay with the song. He loved me and asked me to do a live interview. He even asked my parents if I could go on a double date with him and his 19-year-old son. Here comes the yo-yo effect again. As I said, there were sudden contradictions in my parents' overprotective behavior. If they felt strongly about a career opportunity, they'd contradict themselves and throw me to the wind. My head was turned around when my mother told me that she and Maury were going to drop me off at KFWB radio station at 8:30 p.m. Normally, I was in bed at that hour when I wasn't working, but then I had to factor in the business opportunity aspect of this arrangement. It wasn't like I thought I had any choice in the matter. I liked Bill Balance. I didn't really know him, though, or his son. Neither did my parents, so this arrangement became a calculated risk for me. I began preparing myself just the same as if I were performing. We drove to Hollywood, where the radio station was located. I remember a guy named Russ Regan, who was a record promoter, waiting at the bottom of the narrow, steep stairway that led to KFWB. I passed him on the way up to meet with Bill and Jim Balance. Bill was just finishing his evening show that aired from 6 to 9 p.m. nightly. He wore big horn-rimmed glasses. He announced my arrival by saying, "Here's the girl that makes Ethel Merman sound like Haley Mills." He juxtaposed the woman with the big enough voice to never need a microphone with the little girl who sang "Let's Get Together, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah" in The Parent Trap. Bill was live in the studio and told his listeners, "Here she is, Donna Loren, singing my pick of the week," and he played On the Good Ship Lollipop. Whoa, that was spontaneous. That's the way pop radio was, and still is in moderation, but most of what we hear is all pre-recorded. Not only that, but a DJ didn't always have to funnel their choices through a program director. Bill had a break when he spun my record. "Hi, Donna, meet my son Jim." We sort of said hi shyly. Bill's son was dressed in a suit and tie, very proper. My parents were okay with leaving me after the introduction and made no demands when I was to be home. It was so strange to me that they changed their ways for an opportunity. This seemed to be a business arrangement which really didn't conflict with my own personal relationship with my boyfriend, Bob, so I went along with it. I did feel a bit uncomfortable until Bill told me that we were going to the Coconut Grove to see Wayne Newton perform. Jim acted like a gentleman and escorted me to his father's car. I sat in the front seat with Bill until he stopped to pick up his date for the evening. Then it became a real double date, my first. All was going very well as we sat at our table watching the incredible Wayne Newton entertain us. Bill was having a few cocktails and getting very friendly with his date, who was an attractive woman in her 30s. After the show, the four of us went backstage to Wayne's dressing room, where he was very cordial to all his guests. By now, it was midnight. I thought the night would end, but to my surprise, Bill said, "Okay, now let's go back to my place." I seem to remember his house was somewhere in the valley. Jim and I were polite with each other as we watched his dad get very playful with his date. She was allowing him to get very touchy-feely. All of a sudden, Bill walked toward me with his hands open wide and touched my dress at my bust line. "I knew they were fake," he exclaimed. Shattered. I began to cry. My new habit was to wear a Merry Widow bra. I used to enhance my B-cups with nylon stockings to give me that push-up effect. So when he came at me with both hands, what he felt was harder than a normal maiden form bra. Not only was I wearing a very structured undergarment, but I padded it with something other than myself. Jim felt terrible that his father upset me. He offered to take me home. Now it was 3 a.m. No one had ever reached for me and made contact. The thought of my boyfriend Bob ever exploring forbidden regions was never in my consciousness. I whimpered all the way back to Grandview Boulevard. My mascara left raccoon shadows under my eyes. What a disaster, I thought. My records won't get played on the radio. I really tried not to let my parents' ambition overrule my teenage experience in that moment, but my emotions were very confused. I just couldn't let my parents down, so I pulled myself together before Jim walked me to the door. He was very kind and apologized for his father's behavior. "Should have been me," he joked, referring to replacing himself with my humiliation. Ultimately, Bill Balance continued playing my music, and my dignity was redeemed. He was probably too drunk to remember his actions with me. I kept my feelings to myself and never shared the incident with my parents. They didn't seem to care how late it was when I returned on this one occasion. Maury was just waiting in the living room. He didn't make a scene and just told me to go to my room. As long as I obeyed his commands, there was no problem. I went in my room and felt more confused. I just never could predict what to expect. All I had to do was cooperate and not question anything. I crawled under the covers and hoped that I would forget that night. I couldn't accept the way Mother Nature made me. I had to stuff stockings in my bra to feel confident. Now I was caught. I wasn't Annette or Elizabeth Taylor. My mother was more like them. I felt inadequate, and less than the beauties I modeled myself after. Certainly Sandra Dee doing her bust exercises in Gidget didn't make me feel any better about myself. Oh, those flexing pectorals and no real results. How ironic that I didn't feel good enough when my career was soaring. All the issues of abandonment and rejection and feeling like I wasn't good enough were buried deep within me and, like most people, too painful to address while actively engaged in a career.
So, Donna, there's a lot to unpack in that story of Bill Balance, but I think it highlighted a lot of what we've spoken about in the podcast so far. And first of all, there's this idea of, again, being put into very adult situations, getting set up on or going on this so-called double date with this man and his date, as well as his son, Jim, who I think was put into an uncomfortable situation as well. But even when you're put into this situation because it's for your career, so you can go and do these things because it's for the betterment of your career, that when you have this sort of humiliating and upsetting experience, rather than being able to, I guess, experience that and sit with that and sort of process it, a lot of what your concern was that something bad has happened. He's not going to play my records anymore. My career, my parents' ambition is going to be thwarted because I've had this experience and my career is going to suffer as a result. That must have been a very confusing experience to have.
I kind of see it as sink or swim.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that my complete focus was to please my parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it was. As long as they were happy. And ironically, when they kind of just put me in these situations where I did feel like I had to sink or swim, it was a strange bit of confidence on their part that I wouldn't screw up.
Yeah,
You know?
that's true.
You know, and to think that sure there were some beneficial experiences in that time about being with Bill Balance, who was the #1 DJ in Los Angeles at the time, and he chose to play my records, which I really appreciated. You know, but it always came down to pleasing my parents for my own survival. And thank goodness he had a young, compassionate son who he thought would have a fun time with me, and ended up driving me home in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
sobbing all the way, and then arriving at my house to Maury sitting in the living room and never questioning a thing, just accepting, whatever it was. I came in 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
My face was tear stained. I clearly was upset, but not a word. It was so pervasive. It's almost like, my mother's, I'm going to go back. My mother's shame was like the first layer of this sticky, gooey lasagna that I was living in. And the next layer was the lie about my biological father.
Yeah.
Try to get through that thick fog. That's why I see it as lasagna, because, what's the first layer of lasagna?
Oh God, the cheese, the sauce, or the
It's the sauce.
I'm an awful Italian. I am terrible. I completely blanked.
Well, let me jog your memory and
please.
wet your taste buds. I mean, that emotional lasagna is sticky and gooey. Lots of people call it the onion and peeling the onion.
Yeah.
I call it the lasagna.
I like that.
The saucy, spicy layer that it goes at the bottom of the casserole dish, and then the big, wide, voluptuous noodles.
I've never heard of a noodle being voluptuous. I like that.
Well, think about the curly edges. There's lots of curves there.
When did this become a cooking show? I'm with it.
We're multifaceted.
Absolutely. Don't put us in a box.
And then up comes a little more sauce, and maybe some sausage, and maybe some cheese, maybe some mozzarella, some Parmesan, on and on until you build it up. Put it in the oven, and it's just gooey and sticky and delicious. Well, when you take away the delicious part and you look at all those layers and think of them as your emotions and the energy that is kind of imbued in how you function as a human being. If you start with shame and then you have another layer that's lies to get through, you just don't feel safe. And so I think that was so pervasive in my life. But then that, again, juxtaposition of, well, we'll just throw her out there. She'll know what to do.
Yeah. And then having these experiences that kind of build on each other and having to deal with them. And like you said, you rose to the occasion. I don't think, and I know, when we speak down the line about Dr. Pepper and so on, and having to carry yourself with this poise and this real adult sensibility when you were 16 then, and this is even a little bit before that, to build.
I'm going to recall my idea about being a light worker.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't think light workers have any necessary age. I think you come in with an energy, and I think it's recognized by some, at the moment of birth. They recognize it. They see it glow. They feel something. And I felt it in, my children. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt it in you when we first met. So I think time is irrelevant in regards to that kind of energy. And it always rescued me.
I think what you say there is so true. There's something innate there just to allow you to be okay even in these situations, because I think the Bill Balance situation kind of, I think, harkens back to something we that you read in the previous episode, but we didn't really talk about, and that was that idea of that sense of lack. And I know you talk about that you felt you had to stuff your bra because you felt this lack there, but to sort of, I guess, go back to the cosmetic surgery you had around this time. So we spoke about this or you read from this in the previous episode, but to remind our readers, when you were 15, I think it was, the decision was made that you would have a nose job to, I guess, look a different way, look less ethnic. And the decision was made again at the kitchen table. And when we say decision, it wasn't a conversation. It was telling you what was going to happen as opposed to a conversation about this. And besides having, I guess, quite a traumatic experience on the operating table, because it was a very, I guess, rudimentary sort of procedure back then, probably compared to what it is now. You had to deal with this idea that your look, wasn't good enough, or the way that you were, wasn't good enough. Did situations like that and the situation with Bill Balance, did that contribute to that kind of feeling of lack that you speak about at that time?
Yeah, there were all kinds of experiences. Those were two. But it goes to the root of, if you're born into an environment with people that make you feel that you are not enough, that you must behave in another way than what you naturally would express, how you naturally would express yourself. But what I wanted to review with you about this cosmetic surgery, and how funny you just referred to stuffing my bra and the vicinity of my body was there. That's pretty funny, Adam. Yes.
Didn't even realize.
Yes. Well, not everybody has a cleavage, and I was developing one. So, but when I remember when I was 11 years old, that my adopted dad, Maury's father, passed away very suddenly. He was only 70. His name was Grandpa Ben. And I did not really ever hear him speak. He was so quiet. But I liked him. And I recall that my dad spoke about him, being a tailor, trained in Russia by my grandma Rose's, Maury's mother, Rose, by her father. And so he was a very skilled man, and he ended up making tuxedos handmade in Beverly Hills for people like Clark Gable.
Fantastic.
In those days. At any rate, Grandpa Ben, when he died, left $500 for me. And I had a very scary dream about him when he died. I spoke about my Zadie, and that was a very loving
Yeah,
experience.
that's your mother's father. Yep.
Yes, but Maury's dad came to me in this dream, and it was quite scary.
Mm.
And and yeah, I was 11 years old. Well, maybe that was the predecessor.
Yeah. Yeah.
At any rate, when I was told at 15 that I would be spending my Christmas vacation that year recovering from surgery,
Mm.
it- they preceded that conversation by saying, for the first time,
Mm.
that Grandpa Ben left me $500. It had been sitting in a bank account, and this is what they were going to do with it.
It was
They
going to
were
be
going to
used for that. Yeah.
they were going to turn me into an all-American girl.
Staggering. That's just staggering.
And and again, their choice was not in the equation. It was
Yeah.
their way or the highway. And I so I went into this meeting the doctor,
Mm.
and and blindly cooperating with the procedure.
Mm.
And then experiencing kind of a horror show,
Mm.
in the operating room, especially, I mean, it wasn't just the injections coming at me like one after another in my
Mm.
face. After they told me, oh, well, you'll feel the first one, but the rest of them you won't feel. Well, that wasn't true.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is the hammer on my nose,
Oh.
but they weren't happy, when they were wiggling my crushed bone around, and they came at me again. But the thing is, I wasn't asleep.
It's horrible. Yeah.
They gave me the local anesthetic
Yeah.
in my face. They wanted me to be alert so they could give me instructions of how to breathe. I opened my eyes. I was experiencing I could hear my skin, being peeled
Oh,
back, and
that's just
having them remove
traumatic.
the bone. And,
Oh.
and at 15, I walked out of there.
Yeah.
I did not spend the night in the hospital. Yeah, I was
Oh.
wrapped up like a mummy. And, and I had bought this pink pastel feather hat that kind of looked like Phyllis Diller used to wear. I thought, well, that'll make me feel a little prettier. So I put that on my head with all these bandages on my
Oh my
face,
goodness.
and ended up looking like a peacock when I
Oh.
came home. And it took weeks and weeks for the swelling and the color and everything to just fade away from that experience. And little by little, the irony
Mm.
is so crazy, that I would look at my profile,
Yeah.
and it would be almost like my mom's nose.
Which you previously didn't feel it looked like, but then ironically, this surgery made it look more like hers. And I was reading, in preparation for our conversation, because I wanted to understand more the idea of, particularly cosmetic surgery and the nose job, and what it meant at that time, and particularly for Jewish girls, because I think there was that sort of situation there where they're talking about the all-American girl. They're talking about not being ethnic or not being, Jewish or looking supposedly Jewish. And I read a New York Times article from quite a few years ago. It's probably about 20 years ago, by an author, Jane Gross, who talked about how the nose job became particularly prevalent in the 60s and probably the early 70s, because there was that idea of many people either didn't want to look Jewish because of what had happened coming from the Holocaust. But what sort of changed in that early 70s was that idea that looking ethnic was no longer seen as something to avoid, and that you had to be that all-American girl. And she sort of gave the example of people like Cher and people like Barbara Streisand, who of course you had that sort of conflictual sort of thought about, that when you were told that you had to look a certain way and your nose had to be a certain way and you had to have a certain bust size, but then soon after you joined Dr. Pepper, they took you to go see her in Hello Dolly, and
Funny Girl.
Funny Girl. I knew as soon as that came out of my mouth that was not right.
That's Carol Channing.
That's Carol Channing. We're thinking about Carol Channing. We're thinking about Phyllis Diller. But when you went and saw her, you were quite conflicted because you saw someone who didn't fit that mold of the all-American girl, but she wasn't going to change herself to fit that way. So you sort of had that real conflictual sort of thought of not feeling good enough or not feeling the way that you should feel. And then there were those contradictions, such as her, or the fact that ironically you eventually signed on as Dr. Pepper as really the all-American girl.
Yes, well, Adam, let me meet you at the box office, on 42nd Street.
Fantastic.
In New York. You and I are ready to walk down the lane and go to our front row center seats.
Amazing.
1963, Barbra Streisand starring in Funny Girl. And I had just completed my first calendar for Dr. Pepper. All that day, I was photographed in 4 different scenes. I needed 4 different hairdos, 4 different costume changes. And when it was at the end of the day, it was announced by one of the VPs of Dr. Pepper that was there, telling me that, okay, now we have an evening out. And they let me wear my prom dress from the last scene that I shot for the Dr. Pepper calendar and walk straight out and go to Broadway.
Isn't that fantastic?
So here you and I are all these years later, but let's go back. And I've got my opera length gloves on and you've got your bow tie and we're walking down the aisle with your shiny, or would you rather have velvet shoes?
Ooh.
Or very Tom Ford, don't you think?
That is very Tom Ford.
Yeah. And we sit down right in the front row middle, and there's Barbra Streisand, and Omar Sharif is her counterpart, her co-star, and she is standing there, in au naturel with her glorious face, like Queen Nefertiti. And I'm, I feel like, a celebrity just coming off the set for Dr. Pepper. And yet I had to, re-image myself to be qualified in a way.
Yeah.
To be something special.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here she is, just the way it is, with that incredible voice and just the beauty that was coming out. And yes, I was enjoying her tremendously, but at the same time wondering about all of my inadequacies and, why I couldn't be accepted for the way I was, although definitely happy and have been ever since, from the results. I did find a way to live in my new face, because even when you have one alteration, it changes everything.
Yeah, I bet.
And I actually became the persona that I was imaging, with that alteration.
And it's
so
it's interesting, isn't it, that when you talk about you became that kind of persona, because as you said, what was interesting is shortly after you were auditioning for Dr. Pepper, but even before then, there were some people who were around this time kind of almost saw something that was even before it kind of happened. You speak about Chuck Lawfer, who owned Teen Magazine and Tiger Beat, big publisher, and he, you started appearing on the teen cover, and you did Teen Magazine quite often. But the first one that you did was, I think, in June 1963. So this is before you appeared in Muscle Beach Party, the first beach party film that you did. He put you on the cover in a beach scene on, next to a surfboard with some teen kids, including your boyfriend at the time, who was Bob Linkletter, who, for those who know, that's Art Linkletter's son. He kind of saw something in you that kind of manifested shortly after when you started doing those movies.
And I was so grateful. He made me feel safe. Number one, he made me feel like there were no hidden agendas.
Yeah.
He just, kind of elevated me into a spotlight that I had been anticipating
Mm,
and hoping for,
mm,
and reaching a certain plateau of success that would gratify my family, and
mm.
have my parents approve, finally approve, approve of me, say you're okay already,
Oh my goodness.
we kind of like you,
Oh God.
and you're okay. so
And
so
even, yeah, just when you talk about, those songs that you did at the time, because you were at Challenge Records as well, and I know you did On the Good Ship Lollipop, and Wink Martindale has that little snippet, and I think Wink and his wife, to this day, or you've
yes.
reacquainted, with them. And the flip side of that record was probably one of my favorite recordings that you ever did, which was If You Love Me, which was originally an Edith Piaf song.
Yes, yes. Oh, Adam, you know what?
Mm,
Will you indulge me? I'm going to do something that, well, I did a tiny bit with
with
Carl
mm,
with
when you
Carl.
spoke to him in the last episode.
Yes, I walked over to my piano, which I'm doing right now,
Hmm.
and I don't know how the sound will be just through the phone, but if you give me a minute, I'm
Hmm.
going to lay it down and I'm going to start the song that you're talking about,
Fantastic.
the way I do it now.
That's right, because you've performed this one for a long time. You did it in the early '60s. I think you did it on, as you said, Bandstand. I hope I've got that right. A couple of times, and you've done it more recently as well in some of the sets that you've done around the place.
If you love me, if you love me, if the sun should tumble from the sky, if the sea should suddenly run dry, if you love me, will you love me? Let it happen, I won't care. If it seems like everything is lost, and a smile never count the cost. If you love me, will you love me? Let it happen, darling. I never care. If you really, really love me, really, really, really love me, I never care. I never care. If you really, really love me.
How tremendous! That reminds me why it's still one of my favorite of your recordings.
That song is so significant. It
Mm,
becomes richer and richer
mm,
and almost like, a diary of, of, of expression, which a song can deliver,
mm.
through melody, through lyrics and the message, and the feeling it gives you. It's such a rich experience.
That's such a rich song, like you said, and as just to, I guess, ask about, because a lot of the songs that you sang back then, you've continued to sing or you've refound. Does the meaning, I'm thinking of if You Love Me is the obvious one. I think that one just gets better all the time, and there's different interpretation. You can interpret it, based on what you're thinking and feeling and what you've, you know, done since that time. But songs even like "It Only Hurts When I Cry," which is probably your most famous one. Do they change over time? Do they allow that reinterpretation?
They do. They truly do. I mean, a silly song may not, but
like "Drop the
but
Drip" or
definitely
that's an obscure
comical.
one. Yeah.
But you never know.
But yeah, that's really cool to hear that idea that a good song, there's something something that can grow and change along with the artist growing and changing, which I think you demonstrate so much in what we do when we talk about so many of these experiences.
Yes, because we are delving into the past
Mm,
through the lens of the present.
Absolutely.
Which is very different. We are not going back to the past and living in it or reliving it. We're drawing from that experience and bringing it to this moment, understanding it to the depth that we can.
Absolutely.
And taking it forward with that wisdom.
That's so true, and thank God we're not living in that past. And, like we always say, it's not about, of course, we're appreciating these wonderful songs, these wonderful movies, whatever else, and that's what we want to do. But we want to reinterpret some of what we've thought about all these years, in the light of the present and what it means right now. So
yes, in that time, the maturity had not really developed. To have the depth of understanding in most cases. I mean, when I listen to Brenda Lee, she sounds like when she was 14 and singing songs of heartbreak and, I'm sorry. And she sounded like she had the experience at a very young age, and not everyone does, to be able to understand. I heard Barbara Streisand when she was 13 years old. I heard a snippet of her doing "Where or When." That is a very sophisticated song. Did she understand what she was singing then? Maybe not. Maybe she liked the melody or the sound of the words. There was a comfort to it. But and her voice, registered and gave her some, fulfillment. And many of the songs that I sang when I was super young, how would I know, this could be the start of something big, or from this moment on, I mean, these are very sophisticated songs for a young person, but there is a frequency that you kind of attach yourself to, that it makes you have a certain feeling, even if you don't have the depth of understanding. You like certain aspects of it, and I think classical music is perfect analogy. That the melody,
that was Lucy.
Hello.
For everyone listening, that was Lucy, my lovely dog, who's just woken up from a nap, agreeing wholeheartedly.
Oh, little Lucy. That was a lovely bark. Just as I was saying how beautiful the music was, and then you chimed in.
Yes, this music at different times of the day is less melodic, but right now it's quite good. But I think, just what you're saying, that idea that you might not have the depth of insight into what the words mean, but something connects, as well as what you were talking about before, that idea of sometimes there is something within people that transcends age or that experience to connect to something very sophisticated, whether it's art, whether it's a song, whether it's a melody, whatever it is, something connects beyond what we would expect from people of your age at that time, or Barbara Streisand or Brenda Lee or anyone else.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Aretha Franklin coming from the church.
Yeah.
Coming from a very spiritual background at a very young age, singing in church, that when she was a teenager, she may not have had life's experience, but she had spiritual experience that gave her the depth of understanding from the very beginning. She had that.
And when you're paired with someone, whether it's a producer or arranger or whoever, who can kind of realize that there's that depth, you get a song like "If You Love Me." I think that was probably Jesse Hodges that was responsible for that one.
Yes.
Yeah, who you worked with, a few times over that sort of early period onwards.
He
And
produced my first record when I was 9.
and what was that called?
I think it's almost Christmas time.
A Jewish girl singing about Christmas time. I love it.
I love, well,
You love
my
Christmas.
infatuation
Yeah.
with Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, I have a recommendation for my new favorite Christmas movie, and I won't divert too much, but it's called Mixed Nuts. It was made in 1994.
I remember this
stars
one.
Steve Martin,
Madeline Kahn.
and Madeline Kahn, and a whole host of incredible actors and
loved
comedians.
that film too. I saw it probably shortly after it first came out, and it kind of just dropped with a thud that no one ever saw it at the time. But
I'm telling you,
yeah, it's worth it.
Juliette Lewis at the end in the manger giving birth on the Venice boardwalk.
Oh my God. Now
in my old backyard.
That's Los Angeles all over, really, isn't it?
Yes, that's my old backyard. That's where I grew up.
Absolutely. Please do. Coming up to the holidays, do see that one if you haven't. It is fantastic. It's one of those movies, that I saw a long, long time ago. But I'm glad to see that you've discovered it. So I want to thank you again for our conversation. It's always enlightening for me, even after all these years of knowing many of these stories, and to hear them and to hear sort of your perspective on it. So thank you.
Oh, it is such a great honor to be able to share our love for each other, not have it be a secret, even though love's a secret weapon.
Yes, love.